targeted funding for English language learners, a more accurate measurement of students in poverty, and a mathematically consistent means for applying the weights. In order to determine the impact of these decisions on equalized pupil counts, education spending, and tax rates for each school district, analysts from the Agency of Education and Joint Fiscal Office have been working to build a statewide data model of our very complex school funding system. We had planned to release the results of this modeling at our October 20th task force meeting. However, several factors have delayed this work, and we must again delay the release of these results. We know that many people are eager to review these results. However, the AOE analyst has had to build an equalized pupil model from scratch, a model that allows for analyzing the impact of both the new pupil weights recommended in the pupil weighting factors report and modifications to the tax equalization formula requested by this task force. This model must go through multiple reviews and updated versions to ensure accuracy. I think we're on version 5.1 or something like that. Further, the report was based on data from 2010 through 2018 and modeled on FY 2018 and thus did not reflect governance changes and new school district configurations that followed the implementation of Act 46. These changes had a significant impact on school budgeting and resource allocation decisions, enrollment figures, and school district sizes, all of which impact the findings of the report and needed to be included in the task force decision-making and the AOE model. Variations to the current school funding formula that would impact the force of pupil weights, including updating the measurement of students in poverty and moving to a more mathematically consistent applications of the weights from a mix of additive and multiplicative to all additive, requires that the pupil weights be recalculated, as outlined in testimony from Professor Colby on October 8th, 2021. Currently, JFO and AOE do not have the capacity to do this recalculation in-house. Thus, we've had to rely on outside analysts, which has delayed the work. Coordinating remote work sessions between AOE, JFO, and the report authors has taken more time than expected because everyone also has additional significant work obligations and personal commitments. The models and underlying data are complex and need to be thoroughly vetted for both conceptual and data accuracy. Releasing results prematurely can cause confusion and additional work and undermine confidence in the analysis. While we know that school districts statewide are eager to see the results of our modeling, we want to ensure that the analysis upon which we are basing public policy and financing recommendations is as accurate as possible, because ultimately these decisions will impact the education of our students statewide. Thank you for your confusion. We look forward to continued robust conversation about this work and the forthcoming results of our modeling. So that's the sort of official explanation. And again, thank you everyone for your patience. I know that people are eager to see the results of this work, and we hope to have something to you next week at a Wednesday meeting, but please stay tuned as we continue to work through the data analysis complications. So we are going to get started unless there are questions from the task force about any of that. Okay, we're going to get started with a review of the pupil weighting tax model as examples. We're going to have Brad James from the Agency of Education come up and walk us through conceptually and mathematically the impact of the weights on different scenarios. So we can see what happens when different weights are changed and how the weights impact different types of school districts statewide. So I'm going to turn it over to Brad. I believe that he has some things up on our website. So if you want to pull those up, and you'll just let us know what we should be looking at.
I will do my best.
Thank you.
Hold on. So for the record, Brad James, Agency of Education. I think what I want to do, as Senator Hardy said, is I want to kind of go back to something we talked about 6 weeks ago when I kind of did an equalized pupil 101, said this is how the equal pupil calculation works. I don't remember exactly when we did that, but I remember I sat here, we went through it. And so what I want to do is I want to show you what's happening on a more simplistic scale, because what we're looking at when we're looking at the model behind the scenes at the moment with all these different weighting factors and the new weighting factors is it becomes complex because they all have interactions with each other. So what I want to do is make it a little simpler so everybody gets conceptually what's happening. And then we can start adding complexity on top of that. So please don't hesitate to stop me. If I say something you don't get, just interrupt right away, because I say things that make sense to me, but not other people all the time. So what we're going to do is we talk about Vermont as a complex state. Yeah, our funding system's complex. It's more the how we raise the money that's complex than is the actual funding, but it's all tied together. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a hypothetical state of 3 school districts so that it's easier to see instead of, what do we have, 115, something like that right now, which has gone down significantly. So if you go to the first email, or not email, but PDF that says number 1, I was going to write the names of those down first, but I couldn't. So I can tell you which ones, but scenario 1, only secondary grade weight. So does everybody have that on their screen?
Their number is 136.
Okay, it's just number 1. Okay, thank you. I did see that. Okay, so what you're looking at here are 3 districts set up for 4, but since I'm not using Excel, I'm not going to use district number 4. Had I been able to use Excel, I would have played with it more so you could see things changing, but we're not. So what I did is I said I have 3 districts, and each district has a total ADM of 20 kids. Okay. And I split them out separately. District 1 has 5 in K6 and 15 in 712. District 2 has 10 in K6 and 10 in 712. And District 3 has 15 in K6 and 5 in 712. But they all have 20 kids. And the reason I chose that is that they're simple numbers. I have a simple brain. They're simple numbers, and you can see what's happening with it. So that box there in the middle, K6, 712, then 1 underneath and 1.2. This is not a real weight. I just made it up for simplistic purposes. So K6 is not weighted at all, it's 1. And 712, I picked 1.2 simply because it was an easy number. Okay, it was even, all right? So you take the non-weighting factor, the 1 of K6, multiply it by the K6 enrollments for the districts, and you get the same numbers, obviously, 5, 10, and 15. Then you take the 712 weight of 1.2 and multiply it by the 712 ADM counts, and you get 18, 12, and 6. So you've now increased your kids, okay, because secondary kids have a bigger weight. Adding them in that, I should columns, I did not. Adding them up in the column that says weight ADM, WGHT is weight. You have 23 for District 1, 23 weighted kids for District 1, 22 weighted ADM for District 2, and 21 weighted kids for District 3. The equalization ratio, I have the calculation right down there in the bottom in blue. The equalization ratio statutorily is very simply the total ADM, so that's the 60 for the state on the left, and divided by the weighted ADM, which would be 66. When you do that division, you get 0.9090909009, et cetera. Okay, so call it 0.909. So that's what's happening there. That equalization ratio now, what we have is the weighted ADM of 66, we have too many students in the state. So what the equalization ratio does is it brings each district down so that the state has the correct number of kids, which is 60, which is what we're after. That's that weight ADM total back on the left. So when you multiply the equalization rate by District 1's 23 weighted ADM, you come to 20.91 equalized pupils. Multiplying it by District 2, you come out with 20. Multiplying it by District 3, they're 21, you get 19.09. What has happened here in this very last column is that you're adjusting the weight of each, the weight of the pupil demographics, I guess, for lack of a better term, the pupil demographics compared to everybody else in the state. If you compare to the average state, I guess is the best way to put it. So if you have more of one kind of student in the state than the rest of the state, then you get adjusted for that. So in District 1, they had more secondary than they had elementary. They had more in terms of compared to the state as a whole. So their final equalized pupil count is higher than their 2-year average, than their ADM total of 20. District 3 had more elementary kids than the state on average. Their weighted ADM is decreased down to 19.09, so that's less than they had in terms of their long-term ADM. Oh, I'm sorry. I should call one.
Senator Person.
When you said that the state had too many students, what do you mean by that?
The way equalized pupils works is you're looking at a 2-year average total in the real world. You're that 2-year average total plus state place kids. That's the number of kids in the state. When you add weights onto that, you come up with a number that's much larger. And so what the law is saying is it says you want to bring it back to what the state really has. And that's when I say it has too many kids, that's what too many ADs. That's what.
And why do you want to bring it back? Why not just use
that would change everything else down the road. I mean, you would come out with the same results, but like for example, the yield would change because tax rates would change. So everything would be adjusted accordingly. It's just another way of doing it.
But mathematically, it actually wouldn't.
And as at the end result, right? Okay.
We just wanted to add another equation.
Sure, yeah.
We didn't have enough.
It was more fun that way. It sounded good. Remember, we're talking about equalizing, so it has to be equalization ratio in there. So what I want you to look at weighted ADM column, we have 23, 22, and 21. The average of that, and this is why I chose these numbers, is 22. Okay. District 1 has more kids than the state average. So their equalized pupil count is higher than their ADM. District 3 has less kids than the state average. So their equalized pupil count is less than their state average, or their ADM average number 20. And then District 3 has exactly the same average as the state. So they have exactly the same number of kids as their average. That's how this is working. That's the whole concept behind this process of equal pupils in the equalization ratio. Any questions on that at the moment?
Did you have a question, Representative Cornelser? No. Okay.
Okay, then if you got that one down pat, we're going to add a little complexity now. And so now in scenario number 2, please, Saoirse. 2. Yes. On number 2, at the very top, you're seeing exactly what you just looked at. Okay, scenario 1, only secondary grade weight. Down below in scenario 2, I've now added in another weight. I added in a weight for sparsity. Again, I simply made up a weight for it. Okay, has no basis in reality whatsoever. I just made up a weight. I called it an additional 15%. So the first set of columns are exactly what you've seen up above. Okay, up through where it says 712, 1.20, 18, 12, and 6. That's exactly everything we've seen so far. The next set where it says sparsity applies, it's very clever that I didn't make them the same font size. The next one where it says sparsity applies, I just said no to District 1, yes to District 2, and yes to District 3, and we're ignoring District 4 because we're not playing with Excel at the moment. So what I'm saying here is that now you have a sparsity weighting factor of 15%, additional 15%, that 0.15 up there in red. So obviously, since District 1 is not eligible for sparsity, they have 0 there. District 2 was, so 0.15 times 20 is 3. And logically enough then, since District 3 is eligible too, 0.15 times their 20 is also 3. So for those Districts 2 and 3, that's the additional weight we're adding for sparsity. When you go to the weighted ADM, now District 1 still has 23. District 2 is up to 25, and District 3 is at 24. Okay, so now your weighted ADM in the state is higher because we've added another factor. So the ratio for the equalization ratio is now 60 divided by 72, that new higher total weight for the state. Yes. Oop. Yep. I'll
I'm
start
sorry,
pulling.
I'm watching too much and I should be watching you.
Sorry.
Representative James.
Thanks. So this is a helpful exercise. I have a confirmation and a question. The fact that that sparsity weight is applied to the ADM and not to the weighted pupil count makes it an additive.
That's correct.
And my second question is the equalization ratio calculated after every step like this?
No.
I didn't think so.
That's good.
Thanks.
That's a good question. The equalization ratio is calculated at the end
Right.
after you add all the weights in.
Okay, so it's
Okay.
not, they're just to kind of show.
I'm just,
In
that's right.
fact, it's a blanket calculation that's applied at the end after all the things are done,
That's
and then we equalize.
That's right. So if we're in the situation that we've been talking about, we have 8 weights, 9, weights, I can't remember the number off the top of my head. Let's say it's 8. I would not do the equalization ratio until I added in all the weights, added them up to the total for the state. And so then I would have that, it'd be a much larger number.
Okay, that's what I thought. In all the times we've walked through this, I just,
Yep.
this is something I hadn't seen and I was like, maybe I misunderstood. All right, thanks.
Okay.
Other questions at the moment? Okay,
Okay.
carry on.
Okay, so we're dividing, in this case, so now we've got a new weighted ADM total of 72. We still have the same number, we still have the same ADM total of 60. So the equalization rate is going to be lower because you're dividing 60 by a larger number. So you're dividing 60 by 72, and down at the bottom, it's 0.833. Okay, when you apply all those weighted ADMs by the 0.833 equalization ratio, District 1 that did not have a sparsity component now has an equalized 0.17. District 2 has an equalized pupil count of 20.83, and District 3 has an equalized pupil total of 20. So if you go to that column of weighted ADM, and we think, okay, what's the state average? Again, because that's what's getting compared to everything here to get equalized pupils, if it's up or down compared to your ADM total. You have 23, 25, 24, so the average is 24. So in this case, District 1 is lower than the state average, and their equalized pupils lower than their ADM. District 2 is higher in this case, and so their equalized pupil count is higher than their ADM. And District 3 is right on the nose at 24, and their equalized pupil count is exactly what it is.
Representative Kornheiser.
And so what I noticed, which might be obvious to everyone else, but it's sort of like regularly stunning to me as we've talked through this process, is that even though one weight might cause a district to have increased capacity, when we add in a second weight, because of the fact that this is all equalized, and in fact, might mean that the total reduces the tax capacity of the district, and that's what I see happening in District 1, because they didn't have sparsity weights.
That's exactly correct. Okay, when a district doesn't have a weight or has a very low amount for some factor, then that is an adverse effect on its count for, it was one way of thinking of it. Okay, and why I wanted you to see this is because that's exactly what's happened in the numbers that we've been running behind the scene that Senator Harding, Representative Kornheiser saying, wait, that doesn't make sense. So when I go back in and look and I take out sparsity as a factor, then it becomes what you're expecting it to be. But now you have these other weights being thrown in that have an impact on everybody because it changes the equalization ratio. That's what's happening. The numerator is not changing, but that denominator is. And then where you sit in regards to the state on the whole, on the average, is what's going to affect your ADM versus your equalized pupils at the end.
Go ahead.
And I just want to clarify for folks that
we're able to, I've been really shocked to see the interactive effects, but the numbers are still incorrect, which is why, we're not looking at them today. 'Cause there are things like districts with 120% poverty in there, and we're waiting on a new calculation weights to come to us. So Ruth and I have had the privilege of watching those interactive effects and being quite shocked by them. But none of the numbers are actually accurate, which is why we're still looking at fake demonstration numbers because the value of seeing those interactive effects for me, I think we all agree that it would be really incredible for everyone else. Interactive effects before we get real numbers.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Representative Kornheiser has said, that sometimes a district that you expect something to happen to, if you look at when you add on the layer of an additional weight, changes what you would expect to happen. And I think that's one of the things out in the field that is causing a lot of confusion too. So we want to make sure that everyone is really crystal clear on the interactive effects of the weights and why there might be a result that we don't expect. Senator Hooker.
I guess that's one of the things that is concerning is taking out one of the weights that's been calculated into the whole mix already, which is ELL. And how will that, taking out that whole subset affect the equalization rate?
It's, you're taking out a whole weight, plus if you recall under current statute, and the way Professor Colby and Bruce Baker and the others did, they kept that in this current language where those ELL students who are not from an economically disadvantaged family are added into the numerator of the poverty ratio. I'm being geekish here, I know, I'm sorry, but they're added in so that numerator is larger while the denominator is not changing. And so that gives you a higher poverty ratio. When you pull those ELL students out who are not economically disadvantaged from the numerator, your denominator stays the same. Your numerator's gotten smaller, so you have a lower poverty ratio for each district at that point. So what that has to do in terms of their modeling is one of the things they're looking at right now, because it is different. It may not make a big difference. It may make a big difference. I don't know, but that's one of the things they're looking at right now.
Thank you.
Representative James.
One more. I know that we calculate the grades first. That's always first process. Does it matter after that what order you do the weights in?
No.
Okay.
And the reason it doesn't is because you made the decision to be at the poverty is multiplicative or not, it's now additive. So it doesn't make any difference which order you do them in because the weights are being done off in this case, the ADM total, right, instead of the grade weighted total column.
Okay. So when poverty was multiplicative or as it is currently, that's why we do it second always. I have more questions about that, but I'm sure we'll get there.
Yeah, I mean, just underscore that going back to, what is it, maybe fifth grade math? I don't remember what grade it was, but we learned order of operations and you do multiplying before you do adding. So now that you're just doing adding, you can do it in any order you want because it's all the same operation. So the order doesn't matter much. And just a point to Senator Hooker's question about the changes that our preliminary decision, that's why we have to recalculate the weights. And that's what Professor Colby and her team are doing right now. So we'll have those new weights with all of the sort of changes that we had preliminarily decided. All right. Thanks. Go ahead, Brad.
Okay. So what I want you to take away from what we've seen so far at the moment is that a couple things is that by adding in a second weight, a second weighting factor, you've changed the equalization ratio. You've lowered it essentially. And that has an impact on everybody. And then how those people fit in, how those districts fit into that second weighting factor has a pretty large impact too. Because remember, for District 1, in that first scenario, it was just secondary grade weighting. Their equalized pupil count was larger than their their ADM. In this scenario, where there's another factor, but they don't get it, then their equal pupil count is now lower than their ADM. So there's an interaction that happens. It gets very complex. There's probably some mathematical formula we could sit down and figure out, but I'd rather not, as to what's really happening. But you could plug in numbers and get it. But that's what's happening in this situation. The third one, that you don't need to pull up, Sorcia, is these top two, and then it's the second one, but I took sparsity, I just zero in for the weighting factor. And what it does is it defaults right back to the very first scenario one, which is logical.
We can all pull it up.
Yeah, you can
Sorcia
pull it up.
doesn't-
Yeah, I just,
Yeah,
she just didn't need to, but it's there. You can look at it. That's all it is. It just is, it's that scenario two, all that data right below it. Instead of having 0.15 as the weighting factor, I put in 0. And again, in Excel, I would have done it for you so you could see it happen, which is always instructive. And the equalization ratio would have changed back up to that 0.909.
This is.
Oh, sorry,
This is
Representative
what goes on now, right? I mean.
Yeah.
I'm not talking, this is not new news that when you
No.
change the factors, the equalization ratio changes.
Yes,
Oh, yeah,
that's
absolutely.
exactly what happens because what we were seeing was a very low equalization ratio. I mean, under current law right now, I think under current law, now the equalization ratio is somewhere around 0.946, somewhere in that range. In the initial scenarios we were looking at, based on some of the things we were talking about behind the scenes, that ratio was going down to 0.69.
Yeah.
And that's a huge impact because it's not just the ratio, which treats all districts the same. It's what's happening within the districts to get to that ratio. And that's where the impact is happening. It's what's happening in that section. Then how's that playing out compared to what the state is on average?
Representative Kornheiser.
And so I think so much of what we're talking about when we implement new weights, which are higher than the existing weights, is that some subtle pieces of the existing funding formula that might have had subtle effects that might not have even been the effects we wanted them to have, but were subtle enough that we were able to sort of look the other way about them, now become quite magnified. And so the multiplicative versus additive becomes quite magnified when the actual size of the weights goes up, and similarly, the effect of adding more weights and the equalization ratio getting up is because, like you just said, like the actual weights are higher, so everything
right.
else gets exponentially raised. And Deb Brighton had a nice alligator chart a few meetings ago. That was the one that was easiest for me to understand how things that we've been doing in current law for a long time are now much more extreme under new weights.
Representative James.
Sorry, me again.
No, go ahead.
Is this the time to ask for a little bit more elaboration? And I think it is, because Emily, we were talking about the alligator chart, about the fact that the weights essentially benefit higher spending districts. Are we going to come to that later? I think I know it's related to the equalization ratio and to the alligator chart, but we'll talk about it later if you want.
It's, I think it might be better to talk about it with Deb Brighton this afternoon. And
Great.
Brad is nodding because it's actually about what the per pupil spending per district is what impacts it the most, and then what the weight is. So I think she might be able to explain it this afternoon, but Brad can too, but it's different than this. So why don't we
It is different.
Yeah,
than this,
just
yes.
carry on with this and then we'll come back to that.
Carry on.
Okay. Any other questions about this? Okay, keep going, Brad.
Okay, so that's kind of what's happening. What we're about to see now is what we've been talking about, okay? And so if you go to number 4, please, Sorcia. So what you're looking at here now are examples of weights on various districts, okay? These are real districts. We decided that we would just kind of call them district A. Well, I decided to call them district A, B, and C instead of their real names. I could have made up names. We all decided that probably a better idea at this point. So these are real districts. Now, one of the things that Senator Hardy was saying earlier on was that the modeling had been done on FY19 data. We're using FY20 data. So we're using FY20 equalized pupil counts as the base and ADM, and we're using FY20 tax rates, which is another conversation we'll have to have at some point. We're using FY20 as our base year now for the modeling. The reason we're not using FY21 is because of the impact of COVID. Okay, that impacted everybody's ADM, it impacted spending. And so the decision was made, I think, by the group as a whole to back out and go back to a year so that wasn't impacting anything. So we're using FY20 data. So the numbers that you're seeing here in column B are the original FY20 equalized pupil counts that were used in FY20. So I'm putting there, that's what it was right there. Okay, so I'm going to talk about each district individually as opposed to all at once. So what we're looking here, let me just kind of go through what the top rows are. You have the original equalized pupil count, you have the long-term ADM. So long-term ADM is my short way of saying it's the 2-year averaged ADM plus state place students. Okay, it's just long-term ADM, LTADM.
I like to think of that as humans.
It's long-term, but
Yes. It's the head count for over 2 years average,
Sort of.
plus state place students.
You're coming down to the woods of my world. You may not want to be there. I'm not sure I do either, but I am. So then columns D, E, F, and G are the grade weights that we've been talking about. Okay, so pre-K is 0.46, K5 is 1, so that's no weight. The pre-K is a deflator, basically. Grade 6A is 1.21, and grades 9, 12 are 1.41. Then we go to the poverty weight. The poverty weight that would, because of the column you guys have chosen to use, was 0.1. What I am not showing in here is the poverty ratio in the background of these numbers that we'll talk about in a minute, but I'm not showing what the poverty ratio is just because I figured there are enough numbers here already. Then columns I, J, and K are the sparsity weights. And so the sparsity is your population per mile squared less than 36 and population per mile squared of greater than or equal to 36, but less than 55. And the third one is the population per square mile of greater than or equal to 55, but less than 100 people. Okay. And the sparsity weight was done by simply taking US Census data and the area data for each town in the state. So I had the population for each town, I had the area for each town, and then I took that to the school district level. So in the case of a union school, to get their sparsity calculated number, I would take all the towns that belong to it, all the population belongs to it, divide, and that was their figure. So in some cases, such as up in North Country, where you have town school districts, you have a junior union high school district that not all the towns belong to. And then you have a union high school district that most of the towns belong to. You get different density, sparsity levels for each place, for each of those entities up there. Again, that happens in other places too, where it's more than one district. So that's what columns I, J, and K are. And then there are the weights of 0.13, 0.6, 0.06, and 0.06. And then column L is the small school sparsity. That's where a district had a small, has a school with an enrollment of less than 100 and also has a sparsity of less than 55. Okay. And then when we calculate that weight, what we're multiplying against is the number of kids in that small school, or schools plural, depending on where you are. It's not by the ADM, it's by enrollments in those schools. Okay. Look at faces here. Everybody seems like they got that.
I do.
Representative Conlon.
Just, the poverty weight we're using here is 0.81.
Yes.
That came from the.
District.
That's, yeah, that's the,
District weight, not controlling for special, for students with.
and just to be clear, these will change.
Yeah.
This is what we're recalculating.
Right.
Brad is just using the column that we, as a task force, decided on,
Right.
but they'll be different.
Yeah,
Next
that's
week.
right. I didn't say that. So,
Thank you.
yes. Okay. So in table 4.8, maybe on page 55 or something of the report, it's column 1. So then column M in this is the long-term weighted, that's what the W means after LT, the long-term weighted ADM. So all I've done is I've added up all those things, all those weights that we've been calculating. Then Column N is where you do the multiplication of long-term weighted ADM by the equalization ratio. In the scenario that we've got here in front of us right now on the state level, the equalization ratio is 0.764. And I'm showing you the change of what column N is and what column B is and column O. That's what the change is. Okay. Questions on what you're seeing before we start talking about numbers?
Everyone? Following along? Okay.
Okay.
You have a question?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I put, you can refer to cells by the number and letters. That's why I put them there, just to make life a little simpler for all of us, maybe. Okay, so for District A is a K-12 district. Okay. So they had 991 equalized pupils. Their long-term ADM was basically 880. So if you think about what's happening in FY20, they had more kids per average than the state did. So their equalized pupil count is higher than their long-term average. So when we do the grade weights, again, I'm not showing the data behind, I'm just showing the end result here. Their pre-K count, they're 51.56. K5 didn't change, it's 369. Okay, or 6-8 with the weighting factor of 1.21 takes them up to 369, or pardon me, I'm wrong column, Brad, 196.65, and then 912 at 1.4 takes them up to 340. We then do the weight. The poverty weight, again, I'm not showing you the equalization ratio or the poverty ratio in the background, but their poverty count is high enough that they get an additional weight of almost 384 kids, or ADM, I should say, not kids. Okay, it's not, their sparsity is above 100 per square mile, so they get nothing for sparsity. They don't have a school, and they have a small school, and they would fail with sparsity anyway if they did. So their long-term weighted ADM in column M is 1,341. When you multiply by the equalization rate.
Hold on. Senator
M
Purcell.
is the total D through H.
Yes, D through L, actually. In this case, for this specific one, yes, D through H. That's the thing to put in there. What they do. So when you take their 1,341 and multiply it by the equalization ratio, you come out with 1,024, 1,025. Column O shows that that's up almost 34 equalized pupils. From column B, 909.
Oh, Representative James, sorry.
I think I should have said yes.
So in current statute, any given district or school, I guess, district or school, is not allowed to go below 96.5% of last year's equalized pupils.
Yes.
But there's nothing to keep them from dropping lower, any percentage lower than the state average. So you're held accountable only to what your own equalized pupils were last year.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And what we did not use the hold harmless provision in these calculations that you're looking at here.
Okay.
Okay, just because I wanted people to see what was happening. It was kind of a decision we talked about. So let's show without the 3.5% hold harmless piece. So hold harmless, that's a good question. Hold harmless does not apply here. And as Representative James, hold harmless is a school district count cannot go lower than 3.5% or than 96.5% of their prior years. They're held to that 3.5% loss. That's the whole harm. That's what the phantom pupils are, the difference between those two. Okay.
Senator Purcell.
Just to clarify, that's just to help ease if they have a drastic reduction.
That's right. When the all first started back in 1999, 2000, population was going down like this. And it used to be the hold harmless was applied against the prior year's hold harmless number. So you started building up this huge tail of phantom students. And probably about 5 years ago or so, the legislature changed that so that it was against what they really had just for 1 year only. So it got rid of that giant tail that was happening in some districts. Good questions.
Senator Brock.
That's a question. The calculation of column L for District 5, how is that calculation arrived at again?
That calculation is looking, that means they have a school, at least one school with less than 100 kids.
Mhm.
And they have a sparsity of less than 55.
Mhm.
So what it's doing is we're saying, okay, they've got, I don't know, 50 kids in that school. I'm making up a number here,
Mhm.
50 kids in that school. So that 50 kids are multiplied by that weight of 0.22.
And the 50 kids are the long-term ADM, correct?
No, no,
No.
this is that, good question.
Yeah.
This is, oh, I'm sitting back too far. This is in the actual enrollment of the school, not
The
ADM.
original FY20, not,
That's right. So when I was looking at this, I was looking at the count of the head count of kids in schools when I was looking at column L.
okay. So column L, the calculation is different than perhaps some
Yes.
of the other columns.
Yes.
This is why everything is so complicated. Each column has a different basis for it.
Well, the problem is every time you multiply it, whether by the original or by the long-term LDM, you get a number that seems to be different than the number in column L for
What-
District 5.
What are you multiplying 0.22 by?
I'm 48.76.
We don't.
That's their equalized pupil count. What you have to look at is how many kids were in the school. Okay, equalized pupil is, okay, good question. Equalized pupil, remember, is a 2-year average.
Okay,
And it weighted, blah, blah, blah. It's a 2-year average count. It is not a head count.
okay.
When we're talking about enrollment, which we're talking about column L, it would be like if you walked into that school over there and you said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kids. Okay, that's how many kids we're talking about here in column L. The actual kids who are enrolled and sitting in that school.
Where's that number?
It is
on this
it is
chart?
not shown. It is
It's
not shown.
it's
Okay.
51.
It's in the background. I mean,
Okay.
again, there are enough numbers. I'm happy to show you the number, but
Okay.
it's in the back. It's in the background is where it is.
Like poverty.
Like poverty, like the
Yeah.
poverty ratio. I'm not doing that calculation either.
Senator Brock, if you do the algebra calculation to back into it, it's 51 pupils in
Yeah.
the building.
So that would be divided by 0.22. So does that help? Yeah, you're not seeing the number is what it boils down to.
I always just trust things I can't see.
I'm good at that.
All
Okay,
right.
so
Yeah.
Senator Brock, so back when we were in real life before the pandemic, witnesses could plug their computers in and we could see it up on the screen, right? And then when we were fully in Zoom, we could screen share. And in room 10, we can plug in, but in room 11, we can't plug in. And the website is only able to post PDFs, it can't post Excel.
Mhm.
And so maybe next time we'll aim for a room that Brad can show us the insides of his computer on, if that's helpful for people and the room is available. But it's just one of, yeah.
I'm glad you couldn't see my face at the inside of my computer. Oh, it's ugly.
All right. Any more questions at the moment? Carry on.
Okay, so questions on District A? Does that we kind of walk through that one? All right, so then District B, it's another pre-K-12 district, and it's roughly the same size. It's got 1,007 kids. It had 1,007 equalized pupils in FY20. Okay, that's column B. Their long-term ADM is 1,016, so it's more than District A. Quite a bit, their long-term ADM. So there are actually more kids there. The pre-K is a little bit less than District 1. It's 49.45. The K-5 is roughly, I don't know, roughly 50 higher than District A. So District B is at 417 in round numbers. Their 6-8 is a larger number also, 277, 278 versus District A's 197 roughly. And the same with 9-12. They have a higher weight in 9-12 in District B at 378 versus the 340 at A. So there are more kids in District B. But when you look at poverty, You see, they can get the same, they don't have as populous as economically disadvantaged as District A does. So their poverty weight is 166, not insignificant, but not as high as the 383, 84 in District A. Again, no sparsity. Again, no small schools with sparsity. Long-term weighted ADM, 1,288. Compared to District A's 1,344. Remember, the difference really was in that poverty piece. When you multiply by the equalization ratio, you come out with 984 equalized pupils. That's less than their long-term ADM. It's almost 23 equalized pupils less than what they had in FY20. And it had to do with the fact that there's poverty. Their poverty situation is not as bad as in District A. The reason I picked this to is to show you how just two fairly similar sized school districts change based on poverty.
Representative Kornheiser.
And the thing that strikes me there is that it still seems like it's, all things considered, a district with a high level of poverty
Mhm.
that we would consider a high level of poverty from the outside. It's just not as high as this other district.
That's right. And again, so what it comes down to is you've got those other factors in there too, and so you get the average and the total long ADM at the weighted ADM at the end. How's that comparing to the state average? And they're low. Okay.
Any other questions? Okay.
Things don't always happen the way you think they're going to happen. So District C is another pre-K-12, but a much smaller one. In FY20, they had 207 equalized pupils. Their long-term ADM was 204. So they were right around the average for the state in FY20. Their pre-K is about 4. Their K5 is about 95. No weights there. 6-8 is 42 and a half roughly. And their 9-12 is about 95 and a half. They have a poverty weight of 20.86 of 21. But now they have a sparsity weight. They're in a town, in a school district that does not have a lot of people. So they're under 36 persons per square mile. So when you work out their poverty weight, they get an additional 26.6 roughly kids or ADM added to it. Obviously the next two don't apply, the next two poverties. Then they don't have a small school with poverty. So there's a 0 in column L. When you add up column M, add them all together in column M, you come up with 284 roughly. Multiply that by the equalization ratio, you get 116.8, so call it 217. That's an increase over FY20 of about 9.6 kids. And that has to do with the sparsity weight. That's where that's coming from largely, because they did get a sparsity weight. Okay. If I go to column 4 then, or row 4, district D, it's a pre-K6 district. It's a good size district for a pre-K6. It's got 311 kids, 312 kids in FY20, equalized kids, I should say, equalized pupils. But their long-term ADM is 344, 345. So where does that put them on the ratio to the state in FY20? Lower. The pre-K weight almost 26. Their K5 count is weight, quote unquote weight, is about 244. Their 6th through 8th grade weight, it's only 6th grade because they only have their K6 or pre-K6. So they don't have 7 or 8, is about 54 roughly. They have a poverty weight of almost 52. And then they're in a larger district, but still make one of the poverty cuts. So they're greater than 55 people per square mile, but less than 100. That translates into an additional weight of 20.68 for them. They didn't have a small school. So we scoot right over to long-term weight ADM in column M. It's 395.75, so call it 396. When you multiply that by the equalization ratio of 0.76, you come to 2, just over. That is lower than what they had in FY20 by about 9 kids. Okay, so what's happening here is where they were falling low anyway, but what's happening here is that they're still low compared to the state average when it's said and done. And so the equalized pupil count is lower than what it was the prior year.
And also because they don't have a high school.
And they don't have a high,
Get
that's
that-
right,
that
thank
way.
you. I meant to say that because I was looking at that
Yeah.
and forgot. But because they don't have a high school, remember what we showed when we took the sparsity out in those first sets, they don't have a high school, so they don't have that weight at all. So that technically counts against them. I mean, it doesn't, but that's, end result. They're not going to
have that expense.
That's true. That's true also. That's true. There is that. Okay. Details. All right, then the last one we have here is District E. It's another pre-K 6, except it's smaller. It's about 49 equal pupils in FY20. Okay, their long-term ADM was 57. Their pre-K is 6.4, their K5 is 37.2, and they get 7.26 for their 6th grade kids. It's probably a couple, 3, maybe, I don't know. Not a lot. They have a poverty rate of 6.54. Sparsity falls into the first category, so they get an additional 7.44. They do have a small school in a sparse district. So they get that last weight that Senator Brock was asking about. And again, remember, that's against enrollment, which you're not seeing here, not ADM, not equalized people. It's enrollment, which is the actual head count of kids in a school.
Why do you use a different method of calculation for small school compared to the other measures?
It was a decision that was made as we were talking. It could easily be changed, but the decision was if you have let's assume you're in a district that would qualify for sparsity, and it has 6 schools, and one of those schools is less than 100. The other 6 are not. Should all those other 6 kids get weighted because of that one district? Is kind of what the discussion was. And the answer was kind of no, it probably should just be the school. If the task force like change it, that can be changed in the background, that's fine. But that was kind of the discussion. And I understand your question.
And my memory of that conversation, and we've had many conversations as a task force at this point, so happy to be corrected about anyone else's memory of this conversation, was that part of our statutory mission as a task force is to stay in alignment with a few previous acts, and one of them is Act 46. By weighting just the school and not the whole district for having a small school, we felt that we were being more consistent with the intent of Act 46.
And in addition, that's also how the current small school grant works. It works on the actual enrollment of the kids in a school. So we're trying to, I agree, it's messy, but it's trying to keep it as similar as possible to where we are.
Yeah, so just to be clear, it's not something that we changed. It's current law. So we certainly could open that discussion and talk about whether we want to change that, but it isn't, we haven't decided that yet.
From my standpoint, it's a logical explanation as to why you did, but it's a question of understanding that explanation and that background. And that is one of the difficulties throughout all of what we're doing here, to be able to explain to the public how this system works and what it does. I envision a report that does that with lots of footnotes.
Well, I think my perspective on this would be that I would say, I've kind of lumped the categories like grade weights, poverty, sparsity, and then the last one, the small school sparsity, and just have a paragraph about each one. Just kind of explain, here's what's happening, here's why it happened. And I think that would take care. But you're right, it does need to be explained. I completely agree.
All right, want to keep going?
Sure. Okay. So now we've worked our way all the way through the weights in District 5 or District E, which is number 5. Their long-term weighted ADM is 76, just over. Multiply that by equalization ratio, 58, just over 58, and that's about another 9.43 equalized pupils compared to FY20. Okay, so that small school sparsity weight helped them quite a bit, probably. Okay, again, looking through it. Any questions on what you're seeing at the moment? Is this sort of making sense? I mean, I want you to see the complexity of it, why we went through the first part first to apply it to this. And it's more complex than what I showed you at first. It's like there are more factors.
Any other questions, Senator Hooker? No? Okay. All right.
Okay, the one last thing then really before I'm done is the next one you see when Sorsh pulls it up is number 5. And it's exactly what you're looking at here, except I took out all the sparsity weights. So sparsity for all the 3 in columns I, J, K, and L, I set to 0. And what I want, and then the last slide at 6 is going to be a comparison between, but I want you to see what happens. And so would you pull up number 5, please, Sorsha? You did. Okay, I'm looking at my screen. So okay, so the top is what you saw, but right below it, you'll see that under all those sparsities, it's 0. And I'm not that this is discussed, but I just want to see what impact it has when we're changing weights and adding in new weights and everything. So if you look at this, if you look at District A on column O now, you'll see that they are now 71 equalized pupils higher in FY20, whereas before they were about 34. So removing the sparsity bumped them up. Same thing happened to District B. They had lost 23 compared to FY20. Now they're gaining 13 compared to FY20. District C, line 8 here, row 8 on this chart, had a sparsity weight. They had gained 9.6 initially, but when you take sparsity, they drop. They lose students, about 3.5 students, equalized pupils. Same thing happens for the other 2 because they had a sparsity weight, it's gone. So in this scenario, so District D went from losing 9 kids to now losing 1.5, and District E, which gained 9.43 kids, they had sparsity and they had small school sparsity. Now this they have nothing for their drops. They lose 3 kids. This is not what we're talking about. And the only reason I put it here was simply so you could see the impact that these additional weights tend to have as we go, because this is what Senator Hardy and Representative Kornheiser are talking about, where you see things, say, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. And then you go in and you say, well, if we take this out, what happens? Oh, that starts to make sense because there's this interaction between things that's occurring that's not necessarily intuitive because they play off of each other. And then if you were to look at number 6, the last 3 columns of each of those 2 side by side, so you can see it.
So I just want to make sure that everyone's understanding this interaction and the 2 larger districts versus the 3 smaller districts and how that the sparsity weight, the small schools weight really impacts the equalized pupils, whether you have it in there or not. And we could do the same with other weights and take them in and out and see that same interaction, taking in the poverty weight in and out and seeing that interaction. But this is the why when next week, when we might, knock on wood, have actual districts to look at, what you're going to see might not necessarily be what you expect for certain kinds of districts because of the interaction effects. And earlier printouts were run with 1 weight only. And so only saw the effect of 1 weight. And this is going to show the interaction effect of multiple weights. It's important to sort of keep this in mind for when you see the printouts next week, hopefully.
Right.
Continue to knock on wood.
And if I may, I'm not putting this out here with no sparse weight to say this, you should not have a sparse weight. I'm not suggesting that. I'm simply saying this is so you can see what the impact of these weights have. This is exactly what we're doing right now. They're just more weights, that's all. But I mean, exactly what we're doing right now is we're waiting for secondary, we're waiting for poverty, we're waiting for ELL. I guess that's it. If you have no ELL kids currently, which a lot of districts don't, then that works against you currently. So it's the same thing as how I'm kind of showing poverty here, just to show what's happening. And if you have no poverty kids, that's working against you currently. Okay, so that's, I just want people to see that how it's impacting things, okay? That's, I'm not advocating to say, let's get rid of sparsity by any means.
Absolutely. Hopefully nobody's
Oh,
suggesting.
I want to
Yeah.
make sure that everybody
Yes.
understood that.
Yeah, yeah. It's just to show the math and how
Yeah,
it interacts.
That's what,
Exactly.
and that's what I was doing with those initial ones, that were much simplistic.
Right. Representative Conlon.
I was just leading up forward, but I will just say,
Oh.
I am somewhat, this is great to explain the impact. For me, the question is still, okay, so what? And I guess we'll get a much better picture of that with the actual modeling. Because I'm still not sure whether these big differences that every change makes is a big deal or not a big deal.
Right.
But I guess I need to look at the whole system first.
Right.
Thanks.
No.
Right. The interaction effects are more simplistic with 5 districts versus 151. Is that what you
100,
said?
114, 115, plus
115.
2 unorganized.
I knew it was a
or something.
what, 2 1s and a
Yeah,
5. but-
something. Some number.
And it all does sort of, in a way, come back to the equalization.
It does. It does. That has a lot to do with plus who's getting which weight. I mean, that's, it's a combination of things, et cetera. But as you change that equalization ratio, that's making a difference too. But remember, that's affecting everybody the same. Once you've got your weighted ADM, that it doesn't affect anybody any differently. It's what's happening to get to that point, and that in turn, getting to that point by changing that long-term weighted ADM is changing that equalization rate for everybody.
And just to add to a point that Representative Beck brought up about if you don't have a high school, you don't get the weight, but you don't have the cost of the high school. This afternoon, we're actually going to be going back to that point and to what Representative James also asked about the spending of district and looking at a cost equalization kind of scenario that's based on weights, but is really more sort of trying to target that issue of cost and spending. And this is really about the equalization, number of equalized pupils that are used to calculate tax rates. So hold those thoughts, and those will be addressed more this afternoon with more questions, I think, or hopefully more answers. Representative
I
Conlon.
hope I'm not getting ahead of the game here, but when you go to do your modeling, and you have a non-operating district, what do you do with sparsity and small schools? Does that even get applied since you're not operating a school?
The sparsity would, because we're talking about the fact that kids, so the sparse would, because they have to send their kids somewhere. What right or wrong, like, it would count.
Okay.
But the column L here,
Right, would
SPART would not, because they don't.
Even if they're attending.
Even, right, if they're attending a school in another district that qualifies, then they would be counted over there for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
But not for the
Well-
resident district in this case, because again, as we were talking with Senator Brock, we're talking about enrollment. Enrollment is not by district of residence. ADM is by district of residence. Equalized pupils are by district of residence. Enrollment is by the school you attend, regardless of where you come from.
Representative Conlon, that is also a conversation we can have about which weights apply to
Yeah.
which type of
I
districts,
didn't want to
whether
get ahead
they're
of ourselves.
operating. No, I mean, I think it's an important conversation to have, and whether, especially when we're talking about the sort of cost part of it, whether or not, if they're not actually operating a school, they don't have cost. So we can certainly get back to that conversation at any point. Are there any other questions for Brad on all of this? You're sticking around.
I'm
so
sticking around.
Okay. And on all of this for this morning, making sure that we're understanding the interaction and math effects of these weights. And this is just super foundational to what we're trying to do here.
I'm going to keep on coming back to you, and again, reflection, not question. Sorry, Brad, that you're sitting there while I reflect. Is that a district with, because of the way everything gets equalized against every other district, a district with a really high need because of a lot of kids living in poverty, but not, say, rural, might not wind up with the tax capacity it might need because it's being equalized across the state. Similarly, a district with a really high need for resources because it's so rural, but that doesn't have that many kids living in poverty might wind up in that same situation. I think that's it's sort of interesting about how the needs of those different resource needs tug against each other once you're equalizing it across the whole
Mhm.
state the way we do.
Okay, any other questions? Brad will still be here, but we want to make sure that, because we are running up on our half an hour, we only have a half an hour break to get some food, use the facilities, take a stretch, go outside and breathe without your mask. Any other things? Do you have anything else to
No,
add? that you wanna
That's what I
say?
had for the time being.
Okay. How about you, Mark? Is there anything you want to add at this point? Okay, great. I want to make sure. Okay. Thank you very much. This was really helpful. And at this point, I think we are going to take our break. We need to, and I said this for me and Senator Brock especially, we need to be back here at 11 o'clock on sharp because we are starting our public hearing. That's the word I'm looking for at that time. And we do have 35 people signed for that public hearing. So we want to make sure that we're back here to listen to them during that 2 hours. And if we end early, we can take another break, but want to make sure we're here at 11. So
5 of 11.
pardon me?
5 of 11.
5 of 11. Thank you, Representative Collins. 5 till 11. Be back here. And thanks for